Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here this evening. I'm delighted to be opening our second session on sustainable development. I'm delighted to be welcoming you all here this evening for this new episode dedicated to mediation for sustainable development. 15 days ago, 2 weeks ago, we had our first session. Thank you very much for coming back. We talked about sustainable architecture and built heritage. Today, we're going to be talking about how to raise awareness among the general public around this major issue associated with sustainable development. On the 5th of July, we will have our final session, and with our for our final sustainable development session for the rest of our program. So let me just start by an introduction. I would like to thank all of our ICOM France, ICOM Canada, ICOM Arab, ICOM LAC, ICOM CC, ICTOP, University of Quebec and NATHIST, who I'm citing the national committee that coordinated the session this evening. I would like to thank Dominique Volonitz, who will be moderating this episode of and I thank them for their precious support. And Claude Maurice, Alexina Marquinet, and our translators, who are going to allow us to communicate as broadly as possible this evening, as we like to do. Doris, I'd like to hand over to you now.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon for everyone. I'm so happy to see so many people joining us in this meeting. And on behalf of NATHIST, I'm very excited and proud to be part of this project, of these 5 or 6 meetings concerning sustainability. With natural history museums, we were occupied with sustainability for a long time now. But since Agenda 2030 of the UN, it became obvious that it's not only environmental issues, it's also very, very much connected to society. And I think that in that, not only natural history museums, but all kinds of museums can contribute, because we are considered to be very credible in our communities. And so we can have the information and the activities with our publics that can help everyone addressing this issue. I'm not the one who is coordinating this meeting. My colleague, my vice president, Philippe Guillet from Muséum, he will be the one who is coordinating, and I'm a very enthusiastic listener to this meeting. So please, Philippe, take the stage.
Good morning, good evening, everybody. I am also very delighted to be taking part in moderating an issue which, as Dorit said, is central for natural history museums. And beyond that, it's very ancient. It's been deeply rooted in our museums. I am a moderator of the meeting this evening. I will make sure that we have as rich discussion as possible between the different participants and the speakers. This is what we find most interesting. Interactivity is not always easy in this video session, but it is an extraordinary way of touching lots of people right across the world. So mediation for sustainable development, I wouldn't have written it this way, to be very honest. I would have explained it differently. Let me explain this now before handing over to the speakers. Mediation, yes, okay, I'm okay with this term, mediation or cultural mediation, anything for the public in any ways possible, using whatever resources possible. This term I find very fitting. Sustainable development poses some problems for me I do not hear this term much outside of government discourse. Bizarrely, in the museum project that we have here in the Museum of Nantes, over the 100 of pages or so around the project, this term does not appear. Why does this term not appear? It is a static term that does not communicate current urgency for the environment. The collapse of biodiversity, I don't need to give you figures. This is awful, with a number of bird species, for instance, that have disappeared very recently in recent decades. The climate urgency here in Europe, summer 2022, showed the excess brought about by an unregulated climate. And also, as Dorit said, in a human term, in a social term, this is not just something that affects nature, it goes well beyond this. It is easier for us to talk about an ecological transition, a societal transition that better meets these urgencies. And let's go further still. In our project, we've used the term of habitability of the planet. And this is for everybody, not just for the human race, but for all life on Earth. As humans, we have made the Earth unlivable, uninhabitable. And all of these concepts are held within this term, sustainable development. So there are 4 speakers in this session. So Anne Charpentier, who comes from Montreal, who will be giving a short presentation. Ludivine Vendé, who is one of my colleagues who works at the Museum of Nantes with some specific fields of interest. Tamar, who will be speaking more from a point of view with a focus on art rather than natural history. And to finish off, Marina Piquet, or Piquet, from Brazil, in order to talk more about links with the community. So I am very soon now going to hand over to Anne Charpentier. She holds 2 master's degrees from the University of Montreal, one in biological sciences and the other in museology. She has worked a lot on the design of the biodome in Montreal. More recently, she has worked in the insectarium of Montreal. This is quite extraordinary, and there were a lot of awards. She also works as a director of the botanical gardens, and under the director's plan of this organization, she has been working on the ecological transition, which is a term, as I said, that I prefer. So allow me now to hand over to Anne, who will give a brief presentation with an important message to communicate. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Thank you, everyone, for inviting me. I really appreciate the invitation. I know Ludivine a little bit. It's lovely to see you on my screen. And I know perhaps some of the other participants as well. So who are we? Perhaps I go first to the first slide. So we're a space for life. There's 5 museums in Montreal, with the biodome, the biosphere, the insectarium, the botanical garden, and the planetarium, which are all there to help human beings live better with nature. And so the vision came out of the vision of Montreal 2030. This is a vision for the city where we have sought to develop sustainably the population's autonomy to act to protect biodiversity and nature and contribute to accelerating the transition. Next slide, please. So the botanical garden, just to summarize it very quickly, if you don't know it, it's a large botanical garden with 75 hectares hectares, a number of different collections, thematic gardens, about 200 employees working here. We have about 914,000 visitors every year. A number of people are impacted by our mediation, educational and cultural mediation programs. There are 25,000 young people impacted, and there's 21,000 members of the Friends of the Botanical Garden. And we're also doing research. We have about 300 researchers working here from the University of Montreal, and also a collaboration for training with the School of Horticulture Professions. As I said, we are linked to, and we are already really connected into this notion of accelerating the socio-ecological transition. That's part of the Montreal 2030 strategy to strengthen this transition, to increase solidarity and inclusion, to amplify democracy and participation. So we're involved in citizen science, participatory science. We want to stimulate innovation and creativity. And so I'm not going to talk about the brand new plan for the Botanical Garden. I've just had it delivered in my office this morning, this new directional plan, which has 28 different actions, which are all aimed at supporting the mission of the Botanical Garden and ensuring that the mission lasts and succeeds over the coming years, and with a focus particularly up to 2031. So there are three key areas that the 28 actions focused on. The first part is to establish an exemplary garden in terms of socio-ecological transition. And as a showcase, I'm very aware and very sensitive to what Philippe has just said, because I'm going to talk about cultural mediation, but we just need to understand that all institutions communicate messages. And as institutions, we need to be exemplary. Perhaps just some examples for the Botanical Garden is this is one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases in Montreal. This is the case for this Botanical Garden. This is an important issue that which we need to deal with. When it was founded, we put in place taps for water, which is filtrated, and we're losing water, but we need to go towards recovering this water. And we're going to also put in place a new technologies to use runoff water, and that's what it means to be an exemplary and to be a demonstration showcase where we show solutions, we demonstrate solutions, because what we want is for plants and nature to be at the heart of the socio-ecological transition. A second aspect of this plan is that we want to develop an inspiring experience which is accessible to all. This is important because our museums need to be increasingly open and accessible for diversity. Here we're talking about accessibility, universal accessibility for different people with different limitations. And here we want to work really hard because currently the garden is only partially accessible. And then there's a third focus, is that we want to have a garden that's committed to its community and to the whole world. Here we've created the section as part of our public and education programs, which is called citizen movements and mobilization, because we want to support environmental groups. We want to give them tools and share the expertise of the Botanical Garden with them so that we can be people who support more rather than simply people that provide content, as it were. And so here's just a few examples of our approach, because we're working with our education and educational policy. We want to develop the approach of the institution. So we want to, in our education and mediation approach, create a personal connection, which creates an emotional attachment, which means that people want to come back. We want there to be a personal relationship with reciprocity, a dynamic relationship which is rich, rather than positioning ourselves as in a posture that is the leading and providing content, as it were. As I said, we want to communicate information, yes, but support as well, and create memories for our visitors. In terms of the approaches that we have, like a number of different museums, we work with a number of disciplines, whether it's botany or plants, of course, but for the insectarium, this would be to do with entomology, or the planetarium is to do with, of course, the universe. But we have different resources, different means. Of course, there are our plant collections in the botanical garden, but we're adopting postures where we're telling stories, we're opening up dialogues. This is true as well for our techniques of communication and of mediation, using questions, observation. And then why is this important? And also, sorry, also the themes. Why is this important? Because each person that comes to visit us is unique and arrives with their own posture, their own experience, their own knowledge. So we give them the opportunity to come in any way they want to come through the doorway, as it were, that they want to. Of course, scientific knowledge is very much present, but it's not the goal, as it were. The goal is that visitors might go out. Sorry, I thought somebody said something. And the goal is for visitors to leave us with some baggage, with some understanding, and have new competencies, new skills. Just to wrap up, here's some information that the education team works with. So we start with feelings and emotions in order to encourage curiosity and an awakening. And we propose workshops where participants really take part in order to give tools and ideas linked to this socio-ecological transition. So it's really about a posture of support. The cultural mediators come alongside our public and our audiences, our visitors, rather than in front of them, as it were, and we seek to really give our visitors tools. So I could say a lot more, but I wanted to be very quick, very short, as you asked me to be. So there we go. Thank you. Thank you, and that's a really interesting presentation, and I think there's been a lot of experience that you've had in your botanical garden, and I think this new plan that you're developing is going to help you really to present the direction of where you're going to go. So I think the idea is not to take questions now, but to continue with the presentations. So the next presentation is from Ludivine Vendé, who works here at the Nantes Museum. She is head of development for the Nantes Metropolitan Area Center for Scientific, Technical and Industrial Culture. And this has been linked into a department of the museum. She has been in charge of the Nantes Metropolitan Area's CSTI, which is Scientific, Technical and Industrial Culture, since 2022. Previously, at the Conservatoire National des Arts et Métiers, she was responsible for regional coordination of the Fête de la Science in France, as well as the Village des Sciences in Nantes. In 2016. She also focused in heritage questions, and she's very interested in the mainstreaming, the popularization of science. and she's very rooted into the Nantes territory, the Nantes area. So over to you, Ludivine.
Can you hear me correctly? Excellent. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to this session. As Philippe has said, I'm going to talk to you about what is happening at the University of Nantes. As we have previously heard, it is one of the roles of museums to talk about relationships between living beings and their environment. I chose to focus my presentation on one of our objectives, which is to give publics an opportunity to discover and act. So this is something that we are working on in our cultural programs. I've shown a few pictures at the bottom there of the various exhibitions we've had recently at the museum. I'm not going to spend much time on that, and I'm going to go straight into some of the deeper information. So at the moment, there is an exhibition at the Museum of Nantes called Ocean, Never Before Seen Dive. So we're talking about the ocean and ocean exploration, the importance of this environment. And it's linked to sustainable development, the ecological transition. There's a route through the exhibition to talk about microplastics, pollution, acidification of the oceans, and also technological progress. Thanks to studying the ocean, there's programs around a whole program around this exhibition, a small gallery, which we like, as well, a marine siesta where you can relax partway through the exhibition, listening to sounds captured from the seabed whilst reading books that are made available. There's a bibliography which has been prepared by the Scientific Library of the Museum. There's also a whole series of lectures linked to the topic of the exhibition with speakers from the world of research, business, on the hard sciences, marine biology, oceanography, as well as humanities and social sciences. This is something very important to us. Another highlight in our program is that we always work with a large local and national network of partners in order to open up discussion for the public as much as possible. Another example of what the museum is doing for the World Ocean Day, there was a science and arts show which presented texts and songs, poetic songs, digital songs, showing marine exploration. This is a point of entry for the public to get to grips with a very important topic. A final kind of mediation, which I think is very important, is for young audiences. We talk a lot about eco-anxiety in young people. So how can we work on these issues with the public? This is always based on partnership. The mediation team works with a specialized mediator for children around philosophy. We have mediation, cultural mediation sessions to talk about philosophical issues linked to mankind and nature in order to take a step back and try to avoid eco-anxiety taking hold too much in young people. An outdoor project now is called Connivence. This is a project with all of the mediation team and ecologists in the museum. There's a nature and Nature et Jardin Association as well, Nature and Gardens. They work on lands that are lent to associations, which then break it up into plots and allotments, if you like, where people can grow their own vegetables. People have a number of different practices for gardening and growing fruit and vegetables. The project was to build ties between gardeners, residents, and the museum teams. The first exchanges showed that gardeners and residents needed to know more about biodiversity in the gardens, and they needed culture. There was a whole ecosystem developed around this project. First, discovery of gardens. Second, getting the gardeners and residents involved in inventories. So, for example, we talked about bees and spiders in terms of biodiversity. And then opening up these activities with hikes, for instance, to show residents what's happening in these gardens. Opening these up to partners as well to show that there's a story here. There's a history in these neighborhoods. It could be the history of the gardens. It can be the architecture of the neighborhood. This is very important. This project is linked to gardens in a neighborhood and the matter of biodiversity, opening up to a broader cultural component as well. In recent years in France, we have seen a large movement for the renovation of museum structures. This is to better reflect the expectations of the public. A number of museums that are renovating their scenography, their museography, developing new spaces. And as Philippe said, this is true also for the Museum of Nantes, where we've worked on a renovation project with a new museographical exhibition around living on Earth. So this will be renovated between 2025 and 2028. And a new space that will be created. This is important. We're calling it the Science Agora. So we work with partnerships. As I said, the Science Agora works with the scientific library. We want to provide the public with reliable resources and information. This is a space where there will be cultural mediation with teams from the museum and also with external partners with exhibition spaces, in order to build dialogue between science research and the public, the museum, with a variety of different resources in order to create links and build bridges. This space will be free, and we hope that it will be another point of entry for the public to come into the museum or to continue the visit of the museum. We're working a lot on this space. This project reflects the Capetière space, which we have in Orléans Museum, the four-thirds space, with exchange between the public, the museum teams, external actors, associations, for instance, such as scientific culture associations and popular education associations. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Ludivine. We can see that Aude Porqueda has asked a question, and perhaps I think we will be able to hear this question directly. So this is something very specific to our field, and I think it would be good to hear from this after all of our speeches. You talked about proximity in your talk, Ludivine, for the public being represented, like we also heard in Canada. I am now going to hand over to Tamar, who comes from the Genia Schreiber University Arts Gallery. I think she'll be able to tell us a little bit more about this art gallery. This is an interdisciplinary, innovative platform linking art and science. So she is working at the University of Chicago in the Department of Art History and in the Committee on Social Thought. And her museum experience also includes internships and fellowships in, among others, the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Art Institute of Chicago. So this is excellent. Tamar, you're here with us now. Over to you now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tamar, for this experience and this narrative. It's just really very interesting. So I'm just going to hand over to Marina now, who's an architect and a curator from the Reinhardt Academy in her training. She's over 15 years experience in creating exhibitions in Brazil and abroad. And this challenged me a great deal because she's focused on the museum called the Museum of Tomorrow. So I'd love to hear a bit more about what she's doing, as particularly the work that she's doing with her community. So Marina, over to you.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for my colleagues for the great presentations. I personally love these moments where we have the opportunity to share and to see good practices and to see how we are all facing similar issues, although we are very far away from each other geographically. So thank you for the other presentations. And I'll briefly present the museum, and then I will bring some food for thought on the topic that I think that's what we deal with here on a daily basis. So the Museum of Tomorrow is a cultural center. We are in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. It opened in 2015, and it is managed by a nonprofit organization called IDG. That's where I work, specialized in cultural management. So this crazy picture is from the opening weekend, where we had to stay more than 48 hours open, non-stop, free entrance, to make sure that everybody that wanted to visit this spaceship was allowed to come inside and visit. And so it created a huge buzz when the museum opened. Next slide, please. So here's some numbers. Since the opening in 2015, the museum has received more than 5 million visitors, and more than 20% of whom have never been to a museum before. Our surveys, they also showed us that more than 80% of those visitors, they left the museum willing to make some changes to their daily habits to reduce the environmental impact after the visit. So those numbers, they make us really proud. And they're not only numbers, for us, they are confirmation that we are bringing such an important topic in a country like Brazil for a very broad audience. So it makes us really happy, and we're really proud of those numbers. Next slide, please. So to answer Philippe's questions, so why a Museum of Tomorrow, right? It was created by a group of scientists led by an astronomer and environmentalist called Luiz Alberto Oliveira, as a place to foster public debate about our shared tomorrows, how our actions today will shape our collective future. And once I asked, why is not Museum of the Future? And the future is really far away, and it gives us the impression that it's already done, already made. It's already there in the future, waiting for us to arrive. Meanwhile, the tomorrow is closer. It is always tomorrow somewhere. And we have this direct relation between our actions today and how we will live our tomorrow. It depends on our actions today. And this place also wanted to be a call to action. So a cultural center, really action driven, so this is our tagline. Today is already tomorrow somewhere, and today is the place for action. And how to talk about the tomorrow, about this delta of possibilities. In the museum, we follow what we call 2 ethical guidelines, or 2 main axes for our exhibitions, our programs, everything. We have these 2 ethical guidelines. One of them is sustainability, and the other is conviviality or coexistence. I always find it really hard to translate the second word, but I think it's something between conviviality and coexistence. So the first one deals with how we interact with other living systems in the Earth system, and the second topic is about how we live with each other among humans. And we define ourselves as a new kind of science museum, and our permanent exhibition is a narrative exhibition. It's not an object-based, a collection-based exhibition. It's more of a multimedia exhibition, and we follow some fundamental questions to guide this visitor journey, and such as where do we come from, where are we now, where are we heading to, and how do we want to go? So our narrative is organized around these big questions. Next slide, please. So yesterday, I talked a little bit more about our neighbors program. That's something that really makes us proud as well, because we are located in a part of the city where there's a lot of people living there. So for us, it was really important to connect with these people. But I'll pass to the next slide, then I'll close the slide, so I'll be talking more freely. I just wanted to bring some pictures as most of you have never been here. You're all invited, but I guess most of you have never been here. So I just wanted to bring some pictures for you to understand the type of space where we are. We have a very dynamic agenda. We have things every day at the museum. We have exhibitions, but also seminars, festivals, educational programs, scientific programs. And this week, if you want to search in the museum social media, we have a very busy week with the environmental week, and filled with amazing activities and lots of public. And also the last one I brought some, next slide, please. Two pictures taken yesterday, and I'll be talking a little bit more about them. Can you close the slideshow so I can talk? I can get back to the presentation. Thank you. So in these two ethical guidelines, it's much more about ecology than it is about technology, as some people think before getting to know what we talk about inside this spaceship. And I understand that today the topic was sustainability, and of course the museum building and daily operation, they do follow sustainable practices. We are a single-use plastic-free zone, for example. We are carbon neutral. We use the bay water around us in our cooling systems, etc. There is always room for improvement in these practices. We are always trying to get better and to minimize our environmental impact. And it's not about being perfect, but it's about always trying to improve our practices. So, but I wanted to talk about sustainability beyond this building and operation aspects of it. We understood since the beginning that it was very important for us to walk the talk. So if we make an exhibition about diversity, we should have it reflected in our hiring practices, in promoting, if we are talking about plastics in the ocean, we shouldn't be using single-use plastic in our cafeteria. So we are always trying to improve our practices in this sense, to remain credible, as we understand it's our main asset, our credibility. So, and just to finish and to open for our discussion, I thought about bringing a couple of examples of how we are trying to ecologize our practices here in the museum. So that's why I brought those two pictures that I took yesterday at the museum. So that picture is from a workshop entitled "The Power of Herbs," facilitated by the Little Africa Cultural Center director. She was here at the museum sharing her knowledge about herbs. And I think it is very important that we are a science museum that recognizes ancestral wisdom, that we are committed to go beyond some paradigms and celebrate other forms of knowledge here at the museum. And also, I think that other example that show us in our daily practices, in our narratives, in the way that we create our exhibitions. So currently, for example, our exhibitions, they don't have one curator anymore. We are always working in curatorial teams or committees, and always searching for diversity and to bring different points of view to these groups. And we are learning so much more this way. And we are getting to new types of results now, and bringing different perspectives to the table and to the museum arena, and recognizing other types of knowledge and of wisdom. And because we are a different type of museum, because we are a very recent museum. So we were already created under another understanding of the world. So I think for us, it's a lot easier than for other institutions to try to change some of those structures. And yeah, and I think that the last of the 3 points that I wanted to share about the type of work that we are doing today that I think can be inspiring and can be, we can share, is also about being bold and being affirmative and not neutral, in our communications, in our exhibitions, in our publications. And especially here in Brazil in the past few years, it was not the easiest route. We had a very conservative administration that for us, it was not the easiest route to become so political in our stances at the museum, but it definitely showed, it was proven to be worthwhile. And we are fully aware that the path to remain important and relevant here in the society. So it's a very short time, but I just wanted to bring some highlights of what we are doing and of how we are doing. And can't wait to debate it further with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina. Thank you for your fresh take. Thank you for your audacity, your desire to get things moving. It's really interesting. This is a new museum where you don't have collections. I think that this example is really inspiring. And I would love to go to Rio to see you at the Museum of Tomorrow. We are going to have a time of question and answers, but I would just like to hand over briefly to Odd. No, she doesn't want to? Okay, she wrote something in the chat. She's been working for 20, 25 years or so together. We've known each other for a very long time. It's to look at the question that she asked us all in the chat about this matter of exemplarity. Odd, can you please speak? I'll just do it quickly, but I don't like speaking in public. It was just because I was listening to everybody's experiences, and I saw, for example, that when volunteers are a little bit older in the Museum of Fine Arts or the gardens, for instance, the kind of cultural mediation centered on individuals is not always easy, as they were taught at scientific universities or schools of fine arts. So I was wondering for the botanical gardens and more recently for the Museum of Tomorrow, if you can see differences in the young mediators who arrive that have greater awareness compared to the older ones, or if this isn't necessarily a generational issue. Excellent. Thank you very much. And I do apologize, Odd, for forcing the issue. Anne, would you like to answer this? Yes, I think it's both yes and no, Odd, in the sense that for our mediators, for our scientific mediators and facilitators, there is a transition that is slowly underway. I have been working with them, and there's a real desire to change their posture, and training is done in this way. This is controlled by the museum education team, the volunteer team, and in the museum mediation team. I must say that there are people from a variety of different generations. It's more a matter of open-mindedness and to ensure that we're in line with new approaches rather than a generational issue in itself. So to talk about the volunteers now, working with the Friends of the Botanical Garden, it's very different. There are about 60 volunteers, lots of women. There are only 2 or 3 men of these 60 volunteers, and they are all amateur gardeners for botanical gardens and nature. And we have traditional guided tours where they walk around the different gardens in order to showcase the collections, the beauty of the plants, etc. And in this area, there is a slow transition. We are starting to work with our friends to see how we can give better training, how we can open them up to new approaches. But we do need to bear in mind that these people are not there to replace mediation provided by the museum. It's complementary, it's an addition. The approach of the guided tour to get to know the gardens is something that some of our clientele request, but we want to open a window among these volunteers for something new. So those are two very different realities, and we need to work with both of them. Thank you for the question.
Yes, that's a really very interesting question that has been asked, which we could also ask Marina in Rio about this, the Museum of Tomorrow. There's a question that's been asked by the participants, which might be a little bit more embarrassing, because in the list of the sponsors of the Museum of Tomorrow, there is Shell, the oil giant. So how do you handle this? I mean, of course, we all have this problem in terms of our sponsors. In France, Total, for example, are looking to fund us, and so we say, if we say yes, then we'll get a lot of money, but that also presents some ethical problems. So Marina, two questions. First of all, the question about mediators that we heard from, about what we heard from Aude, but also how do we handle this contradiction between the message of the university and then also our sponsors and our patrons? Marina.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Yes. I'll answer shortly the first one, because I think the second one will give us a lot of topics. So here, we don't have volunteers. In mediation is a cultural thing. In Brazil, we don't have volunteers. I also think that in this sense, diversity is the key. So if we have diverse mediators, we can reach different audiences. Actually, here we are having quite the opposite. We think younger people are really, they feel welcome at the museum, but we are now concerned about a 60 plus feeling welcome and having to deal with some technological aspects that we have. We wanted the museum to be a place where they feel safe, where they can ask, and where they can also learn about how to use other technological features that they have been asked to use outside of the museum. So I think in this, that's what I have to contribute in this sense. So about the sponsorship here, first of all, here in Brazil, we are highly dependent on this type of sponsorship. Currently at the museum, we are 100% funded by companies via some type of tax incentives or other types of mechanism, but we don't receive any public funding at the moment. We have generated income and also this sponsorship that comes from big companies. So it is a very different scenario where I think that if from most European institutions. We have some guidelines to help us make these partnerships with companies. The most important one for us is 100% independence of content, independent curatorship independence. These companies, they don't contribute, they don't give opinions, or they don't sponsor, they don't censor any type of content that we create. This for us is fundamental, and it's on our contract, and it's the #1 topic. The other one is that they have to present to us a convincing plan that they are working somehow towards the transition and what they are doing now, and to become a cleaner company in the nearby future. So, and the third point is that we truly believe in dialogue. So we don't think that shutting the doors for them, as they are very important stakeholders in our society, would help with change. So we want to bring them to the debate. So they are here at the museums in our events, and we are talking. We also bring this type of content to their organization, and there is real interchange, and we really hope to be a positive influence in somehow. But as for now, we have a very healthy relation with these companies, not only Shell, but the other ones that helped us in the past few years when we lost all public funding, and they were responsible to keep the museum open for the public. But I love this topic. We could do another meeting just for this one, because I think it's very interesting and it affects all of us.
And the fact that you have this freedom, that you've been able to develop this freedom, that's something that's really very interesting, because I've always thought that if you aren't promoting us, I would have thought companies might say, if you're not promoting us, but then we're not going to fund you. But actually, you found a way of having a positive influence, and you've been found a way of preventing them from influencing your narrative and your message, which could go against the run of what the company is presenting, in fact. That's very interesting. So are there any other questions that are being asked? I don't know if there's any more questions in the chat or any other questions. I noted some points that seemed really important to me in what was shared, and the perhaps questions that come back to the exemplarity of our institutions. Anne talked about this, and everyone actually referred to this in a different way, this fact of needing to be exemplary in our institutions. And we can't be buildings that are just don't align in any way with environmental standards. Sometimes we realize the extent to which we're losing energy for heating where we are. We've realized that's a real problem. Something we really need to work on. So this is something that we could perhaps talk a bit more on. Tamar, perhaps you could talk to us about this connection between how you've been exemplary in the link between science and art. Tamar, over to you.
Yep. We are the largest university gallery in Israel. Other Israeli universities don't have a gallery this size, and we don't have a collection. So we put up exhibitions that are changing exhibitions, and we always choose a topic that's very kind of timely. So the current exhibition that's up now has to do with neuroscience, cognition, the relationship between perception and cognition. What can we learn from like our senses in response to fake news and to post-truth and all these kind of. So we always choose something, and it's something that we think is timely. In that sense, we're trying to be exemplary, but we also bring together scientists and artists who don't speak the same language. They don't have the same goals. They're not doing the same thing. Sometimes this dialogue is not very kind of easy, because sometimes the scientists think that what they're going to get is like a presentation of their scientific knowledge, and it's not what they get. Sometimes they get criticism over what they do. So in a sense, we're becoming a space that allows for a dialogue that's sometimes not so straightforward. Sometimes it's critical. Sometimes it requires a lot of mediation on my part, but it allows for people from different disciplines and different ways of different practices to speak to one another. And that's in itself also setting an example. Scientists on campus think, oh, the art gallery is for the art people. We don't care. We don't know about art. We don't understand art. This brings them closer. They come. If someone from their unit, from their department is participating, then they come. And so slowly and surely we get to different departments on campus. And then we try to take the lessons we learned from previous exhibitions and keep them going as we move along.
Thank you very much for this answer. I saw that Stephanie Winserit has a question. I can hand over to you, Stephanie, if you would like. If you would like to ask your question directly, you're very welcome to. Thank you very much, Philippe. Yes, we're talking about mediation, and I often ask myself for what happens to the peripublic. And I'm thinking about this in terms of impact. This is one of the objectives of these exhibitions, these actions, and these mediation activities. I'm going to ask this question more generally to all of the speakers and participants listening to us. I wanted to perhaps specify my question a bit. During my public studies, I carried out a survey last year. It's very recent. As part of an exhibition on insects, the idea was to raise awareness of the disappearance of the extinction and the reduction in the number of insects and the urgency that there is to need to be careful and to protect them. I'm going to cut off my video because it sometimes has a few problems. So this public survey that I led across 4 institutions showing the same exhibition told us that the message was communicated. People understood that insects were endangered and they wanted to do something to protect the insects. We also had some feedback from people saying, okay, but what can we do? What can I do? And they asked me if there was a sort of checklist of very concrete actions that individuals can do. What kind of plants should I put in my garden? Not just plants that promote insects, but actually the specific plants, a very concrete list. This is what they were asking. And something else that I noticed from this survey, beyond these very concrete aspects, is that the public is quite specific for the natural history museums that we showed these exhibitions. The 4th museum is a little bit different. It's more an ethnographic museum rather than natural history and natural sciences, but it does present some of these exhibitions. We realized that the exhibition was attracting a different public with different motivations after the exhibition. So it depended on the public. Some publics or a public that's already been won over if it's a natural history or natural sciences museum. And it's less the case in a museum with a slightly different public audience. So I wanted to know whether the conclusions that I drew from this survey have also been found in other museums, and what have visitors said to you about the impact that this can have. We're talking about mediation in terms of sustainability. Thank you very much, Stephanie. I'm going to hand over to Marina to answer that because she talked about this and was talking about visitors that felt mobilized in order to act after visiting the Museum of Tomorrow. Marina.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I was thinking while you were talking that it would be really nice to have a database of these shared surveys, no? So we could cross the results and see similarities and different things. But as far as I know, we don't have that yet. So let me try to make some relations. We did find that visitors left with the sense of, what do I do now? What can I do now? You know, what is in my hands? And a few years ago, in 2018, I think, or 19, the museum developed with IBM, an artificial intelligence device, before ChatGPT, that it tracked what the visitors' interests were along the exhibition. And before you left the exhibition, you received like a report of different, where could you volunteer, what you could read, things that you could do based on your interests. So if you were someone more, the topic that concerns you more, I don't know, the habitat's extinction, if you were really concerned about that, and if you saw things related to that throughout your visit, then you received some actions that you could engage after your visit. So this experiment worked really well, and we are trying to see how we could expand this, because we felt in our surveys that the visitors left the exhibition willing to do more. And many times I just didn't know where to start. So giving them these concrete tools and paths to take action, I think it's a very important thing.
Marina, what was the figure that you gave at the beginning of your presentation? I didn't hear it, I think.
80%. It's quite high, like of the visitors, they said that they wanted to change. We don't know yet. It's really hard to track how many of those actually changed their habits, but 80% were willing to change, which is already something.
Yes, I wanted to give a few examples on the question around insects from Stephanie. The insectarium in Montreal has been completely refurbished. It opened again last year. We could send you to the website for Space for Life, the pictures of this new museum. What's been really interesting is that it's been completely designed to create a positive relationship with insects, because the biggest challenge is because we can say that there's going to be a collapse of insect biodiversity, and a lot of people say, well, I guess that might be a problem, but it's insects, who really cares? Most people are disgusted by insects. They feel disconnected from insects. So the first goal that we wanted to set ourselves with the insectarium was to create a kind of a love for insects and interest in insects. So the whole museum is designed for there to be a kind of progressive experience which leads to an encounter with insects. And we even bring visitors to experience the experience of seeing the world like an insect does, and then they also meet insects face to face, as it were. And so when they come out of the museum, they go through a pollinizator garden with lots of insects pollinizing, and pollinating, sorry. And so this is a good way of talking about the collapse of biodiversity, and also about talking about what we can do. And here we offer a number of different tools, some participatory science tools called the Biodiversity Challenge. And there's also a monarch mission for those who are interested in monarch butterflies. We also invite them to make their own biodiversity garden within the context of our program, our Spaces for Life program, which is called My Garden. And people can go on to the website and get a whole number of ideas about plants that they can use to make their own garden, which can encourage pollinators and encourage biodiversity. And I haven't got this, unfortunately, to hand, but there was an assessment carried out of the success of the impact of the insectarium on visitors in terms of the way it transformed their perspective on insects. And it was really quite impressive in terms of the effectiveness of this museum, which is like a big cultural mediation tool to help people understand insects. Also, just to come back to other things that have been said, perhaps we should give some, we need to be exemplary in terms of what we're offering, the services we offer as well, because for in our all of our sites within our restaurants, we offer a vegetarian menu because we want to encourage our visitors to understand that food and meals with more and more vegetable content is better and better for the environment. In terms of positioning as well, Marina, you were talking about the importance of taking a position as a museum. We're trying to do that for a number of different subjects increasingly, and I invite you to go and see the website espacepourlavie.org. There's an exhibition that's currently on the planetarium called Nobel, based on Nobel Prizes, which have infrequently been awarded to women. So there's a positioning of the planetarium to show and highlight the work of women scientists and their great work, and show the importance of their work. And this is an exhibition that was been carried out by a feminist illustrator who's really committed to the cause and is doing graffiti in the street. She's called Miss Me. So this is quite a daring exhibition, and it's a positioning of the planetarium to really present the work of women. So we're trying to support visitors in their discoveries in different ways at different levels. Thank you, Anne. There's something that really stands out in what you said. There's that commitment or the engagement of the institution. And of course, these are discussions that we've been having for a number of years. I remember a congress in Quebec about 20 years ago when we were talking about these kind of things. But we can see some museums have gone beyond what there is really acceptable in terms of commitment, and they've even entered into a sort of dilettantisme. Actually, because of environmental issues are so strong, sometimes there can be a temptation to go beyond. But I think it's important to think about the fact that we need to be museums that are engaged and committed. I saw a hand raised and then go down again. I think Hélène seems to want to say something. I don't know if Hélène, you got something to say? No. I didn't have to think anything particular to say, but yes, I completely agree with this idea of being a committed and engaged institution. That's really very important. Ludivine, you haven't said much. Perhaps it's because I work with Ludivine, so I've neglected her. But this question of engagement is something that's important, isn't it? And perhaps I should let you talk about this rather than myself, because this is something that's essential in our project. Yes, absolutely. It's a central part of our project in Nantes. I wouldn't necessarily, I won't talk about the whole program, but perhaps particularly about the Agora, which I started presenting in my presentation. The Agora for us is the place where we can do things that we wouldn't do in the rest of the museum trail. Here we have more freedom because we're working in partnership, and we're able to do actions that are more engaged, perhaps more activist, depending on the partners we're working with. But it's also slightly an aside from what we're doing in the museum. Not completely, but it's kind of a complement, a supplement to what's going on in the museum. Yes, I think the role of museums are really interesting, and I think this Rio Museum and for the Museum of Tomorrow has been through a difficult circumstances, but has maintained its direction, has maintained its focus despite the challenges. And then there's this freedom and this which it's had to win and get hold of. I know that talking with some of my colleagues, in particular small institutions, don't always have this freedom. They can't always show their commitment or their engagement on these types of questions, despite the fact these are questions that affect us all. So once again, I think this notion of engagement and commitment is really important. I don't know if there are any other questions. I've just seen that one of our friends from Spain has left us and has really appreciated the presentations and our discussions. we've talked about the commitment of institutions, we've talked about educational values, we've stayed fairly broad brush, really. I've really appreciated the different, all 4 presentations that were selected. I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything. This would be a good time to say anything before we wrap up. I'll of course hand over to Emily to wrap up when it's time. But is there any questions, or does anyone else want to say anything? Clearly, we've got a lot to do, and that's not the case just for natural history museums. All museums actually have a lot to do in this area. There's a lot to be done, and this is a really critical area. I can see a hand raised, but I don't know who it is. It's Anne and Ludivine who've got their hands raised. I just wanted to also respond and talk about the response of our visitors, and also what you were saying, Anne, and the fact that we want to propose actions. This is something that's very important. That's why in the connivance project, we're working on the ground in a long-term way, which is really very different from the visitors that come through an exhibition. This is a long-term exhibition, that long-term project, sorry, that we've co-constructed. We've involved the gardeners. Of course, we've got this assumption that gardeners perhaps have different approaches. We assume that they're probably fairly aware of biodiversity issues and permaculture, and others perhaps less so, but the fact that we're on the ground and we're showing them things, we're showing them biodiversity, I think that gives us something really very specific and concrete. And I think the fact that when we show them that some plants encourage biodiversity, that gives us a real satisfaction and helps us to pursue our commitment. And I think it's really important, this participatory science, and also participatory research. These are things that we want to develop in order to really complete our trails and our exhibitions. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you, Ludivine. Anne, did you have something to say? Yeah, just something, but I just totally agree with what Ludivine has just said, because I think by encouraging participatory science and tools and opportunities, and also going to meet the public outside of our institutions, because there are still a lot of people who don't come into museums. It's an opportunity to go and meet them on the ground. One thing I wanted to add, this will make Aude smile. We've known Aude for some time, and she did some work in her early years around sustainable development and museums. And when we worked before, we used to be called the Museum of Nature of Montreal, in the institution that is now called the Spaces for Life. I don't know what you think, Aude, but perhaps unlike museums that don't have very much resources, I think that we don't have enough focus on sustainable development. When I don't think we used to really have enough of a focus on this, and we weren't really thinking about what we needed to do about sustainable development. We were in a fairly approach that had a very neutral, saw the museum as a neutral place. I think that things have actually changed, because now there is a commitment. We're not neutral anymore, we're acting on these issues. And I think that's really good, because there is a real emergency, it's really urgent. The socio-ecological transition is something that is increasingly being taken into account across all the different activities. And I'm a little bit jealous of Marina, to be honest, and of this Museum of the Tomorrow, because there's this younger institution which actually has already managed to think through these things from the very beginning, and it's part of your genetic code, part of your DNA. Whereas us, the older institutions, we need to sort of go through this transformation. But actually, I think all of our institutions are on the right road. And I think, Philippe, we've been involved in this for more than 30 years, and I can see a real change. And it's really good news. That gives us real hope for the socio-ecological transition. Thank you very much. Thank you, and that's an excellent conclusion. So I don't need to conclude. No, I'm very happy to let you conclude. We could just pass over to Emily if Emily's here just to wrap up, to conclude. Yes, I'm here, of course, but I think Tamar wanted to say something, I think.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to respond very briefly. I'm also very jealous of Marina, I have to say. I wanted to respond briefly to what you said about audiences and outreach, because part of what happened for us, for instance, was that the taxidermies I showed you are from the Museum of Natural History on our campus. There was another piece in the exhibition that was related to the botanical gardens that's on the other side of campus. So what we did is we had little maps for people to walk from one place to the other. People who go to one institution don't know that the other institution exists. And this way we let them know. We have a little sign next to the botanical gardens. They have a root lab, which is something unique. The Racine lab, actually, it's funny, people don't know it exists. So we had a little map next to what we had here, telling people they should walk across campus. This is a way for us to pull all the resources together and to try to reach more audiences, and then sit with them after and ask them what impacted the most. Unfortunately, we don't have a way to check with them, 2 years after, what was left with them. But immediately after the visit, because most of our visitors are groups, immediately after the visit, we do have these kinds of discussions, and we should think of ways to develop the way we assess our impact. That's for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamar. I think you've also given a great conclusion, Emily. Yes, I'm here. Everybody has been making incredible conclusions, so I don't think I'm going to need to conclude. It's not going to be as good. I don't know if there's a final question from one of the project partners, or if anybody would like to share an experience that you've had in order to enrich our discussion this evening. I cannot see any hands raised. Without any regrets, then let's wrap up. Thank you so much to all of you for taking part. Thank you for the rich discussions that we've had. I'm delighted to see the enthusiastic participation, and I look forward to seeing you in a little less than 1 month on the 5th of July. I'm just checking with Anne-Claude that it is the 5th of July, but yes, that will be the next meeting in our cycle of lectures. I wish you all an excellent evening, an excellent day, an excellent morning, depending on where you are, or good night if you're in some parts of the world. So let's continue to communicate around this cycle to have more and more people every single session. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.